Well, anyway, life sneaks up on you at every age. And I'll go back to when I was a new parent, and my son's now 25. I don't have the gray wisdom yet, so don't expect too much wisdom. But when we brought him home, I mean, everything, they're wrapped up in that little burrito of a blanket, and everything's perfect, and they sleep perfectly, and nurses are in there 24/7 taking care of him. My wife was relaxing, and we just thought, it's an amazing experience. And we get the baby home, and that kid cried nonstop for the next 72 hours. And we did all the checks, the diaper, has he been fed, does he need to be burped, all that stuff. And he never ever stopped crying. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm freaking out. What are we doing wrong? I don't think I can do this, and the whole thing. And I found out later from a lot of other parents, it's like, oh yeah, well, they're so used to the warmth and perfection of the hospital that when you get them home, it's a new environment, and they're having a hard time coping. And it all makes sense now, but at the time, I wish somebody would have told me that before I brought my baby home. And now when I meet expecting parents, that's the first thing I tell them is, it's going to be awesome, but beware when you get home, this is going to happen, and don't panic. So now on the other end of the spectrum, this presentation is really a focus on things you wish you would have known when you get to the point where you have to make some difficult decisions about how to add assistance in some way, whether it's in the home, and what to look for, and how to know, hey, is it time that we need some extra help? Is it a possibility that we need to live somewhere where there's help available? All those kinds of things. Do you know what age you have to be to live in a senior home? Do you know what the minimum age is? 55. Do you know what the average age of people who actually go into them now is? 75. I heard a 75, I heard a 80 something. 87. Can you believe that? 87 is the average age. I understand that because if somebody today told me, you're going to have to leave your home, your chair, your stereo, your TV, your comfy couch, your fireplace, and you're going to have to go live in a 1,000 square foot apartment, I wouldn't be too thrilled. I like my house. I worked hard to get it. We have it. I enjoy it. So I get that there's never going to be a point in my life where I can't wait to get out of my house. So I understand that. So my goal in this presentation is to help you see this from the perspective of someone who is not ready to make that decision, whether it's a spouse or if you're a child and you have a parent that's going into that situation. I want you to think in terms of what they're going through when this decision comes up. So there's really three main things I want to focus on. Number one was covered extremely well by Dan in the sermon. I'm going to just highlight some biblical principles on why is it important to be thinking about and to be caring for your family. The second thing is taking those biblical attitudes and just practically applying them to this situation. When you're having difficult conversations and looking towards that transition time, how do you apply those principles when you have those hard emotional conversations? And then thirdly, just some practical advice and some practical things to look for so that you can start thinking about this now so that it doesn't sneak up on you. Again, this does sneak up on you. There's never a good time to take a parent in, to go move in with your children, to be thinking about looking for a place to live. There's never a good time. It's always uncomfortable. So if you're thinking about these things ahead of time, that's helpful. So my role is I'm the president of the Lutheran Home Association, but that doesn't make me a medical expert. I have people for that. the nurses, the CNAs, the social workers, those are the people who are trained and licensed to make these decisions and to walk families through this process. I'm involved in it. I see it all the time. It's part of my daily life, but I am not an expert. So the advice that I give you is just going to be practical advice based on what I've seen. But finally, I would still urge you to talk to a social worker or a medical professional if you want specific, clear advice about your family and your situation. So I know a lot of stuff, but I'm not an expert, and I'll just share what I know. So that's my fam. My oldest son, Ethan, lives out in Oklahoma. My daughter, Elise, is in Rochester. My son, Josiah, is at UW La Crosse. That's my son's wife, Anne Marie. They live in Oklahoma. That's my wife, Sarah. We celebrated 29 years this year. How cool is that? Just a delightful human being. I wouldn't be here without all of them and without her. I was a pastor in Pueblo, West Colorado for 14 years. So I started out there in 1998. We did an exploratory congregation. That congregation still exists. They're doing fine. I did a career change in 2012. I have what my wife and I call my extended midlife crisis, and then I ended up at the Lutheran Home 8 years ago. I started there as a development director, so I did a lot of fundraising efforts for the ministry of the Lutheran Home. The Lutheran Home is made up of three main components. Number one is the skilled nursing facility, where we have 55 residents that we care for. We used to be 100, and after COVID, we are now at 55. So the entire nursing home industry changed dramatically after COVID. And a lot of it is fear of being trapped during a pandemic, which I totally understand. So we also provide assisted living and senior living, independent senior living on our same campus. So if somebody lives in assisted living, they have a hospital stay, they need to recover, they can come into our nursing home for 2 weeks or whatever, get recovered, and then go right back home, and it's all on the same campus. And then in between those two facilities, we have a 52-bed care center for individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities. So we have a whole range of care that we provide. But what makes the Lutheran Home special, we've been around for 125 years. What makes it special is that we have full-time WELS pastors who are on our staff that provide care. They provide spiritual care. They provide sermons and Bible studies and one-on-one counseling, not only for the residents, but also for the staff. So just that ongoing presence of Jesus in their life at a critical point in life, that's why I took the job. I wanted to be involved in a really special ministry like that, and that is what we do. So I'm going to start with some biblical principles. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly because Dan nailed this in the sermon. So honoring our parents. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and you may enjoy long life on the earth. So God says, this is something I want you to do. We want to honor God, and we want to honor the parents that he gave us. And he said, this is a promise and a blessing that you get. When you do things my way and care for your loved ones, I'm going to bless you. So the way that you honor your parents as a child in a different way than you honor them as an adult. So you always are honoring your parents, but the way that you honor them changes. Just the perspective and the point of view changes. This is Jesus when he was a child. It is the only scenario we know from the Bible where we get to see what Jesus was like as a child. In this case, he was about 12 years old. And he's God, and he's with the teachers in the temple. His parents are freaking out because they can't find him. And when they come, Mary kind of scolds him. We've been searching for you. Why didn't you tell us where you were? And he calmly just says, oh, well, why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I'd be about my Father's business? But then he was obedient to them, and he went with them anyway. So as a child, honoring his parents, he always showed them respect, even though at any point he could have pulled the I'm God card. He never did that. He showed respect and honor to his parents at a young age. And then this was referenced in the sermon today, from the cross, and this is I think, really special that it's one of the 7 statements that we know from the cross in the Bible is that he was taking care of his mom. And keep in mind that he was under excruciating suffering while he was still thinking about his mom. I think that's really important, that no matter what Jesus' circumstances were, he wanted us to know not only did he model it for us by doing it, but he also provided the inspiration that as he was giving his life for us, he made sure that his mom was taken care of. That's a really special thing. That motivation is important. You're going to see a lot of other things that motivate us. Think of all the things your parents did for you, and now you want to do it for them. That's good motivation. But think of what Jesus Christ did for you. That is the ultimate motivation. Because we speak in a church family setting that this is how your parents treated you, and now you treat them with respect. But we also can't be naive to the fact that some people didn't have that upbringing. Some people maybe had a rough relationship with their parents. Some people lived in homes where there was abuse. And so when you understand the true motivation for caring for your parents, and that's love for Jesus, that helps you to understand that it does not disqualify you from doing what God asks you to do, even if you had a difficult upbringing. God still expects you to carry out this role. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. There are 2 things in there that are really important. This one was covered really well in the sermon, repaying your parents and grandparents, but the other one is even more important. This is pleasing to God. It is what God wants us to do. And I want to kind of hang on that repay thing. You know, we just for fun, somebody put a dollar figure on how much it costs to raise a child. The figure that I have is actually as far back as 2017. I haven't seen a more modern one. But anyone have any guesses, not including college, how much does it cost to raise a child from birth to when they leave the house, not including college? That's a very excellent guess. The answer is $223,000. And now, 5-6 years later, it's probably more than that. And if your kids play hockey, that's probably another $100,000 right there. Mine didn't, so I saved $100,000, but it's expensive. But again, the most important thing that we want to focus on in this passage is not only do you repay them and thank them, but it also honors God to do it. But when you think about what your parents have done for you, that helps to promote one of the key words I want you to take away from today as you have these interactions, and that word is empathy. If you are able to think what they went through when you were a child, and especially when you become a parent, and then when your children, I don't have any grandkids yet, but when your children grow up and have children and then come to you and say, boy, I get it now, Mom. I understand what it was like that you waited up all night and you were worried about where I was. And when you have that connection where your kids get what you went through, they feel empathy for what you're experiencing. So what I want you to do is kind of think projected empathy. What's it going to be like when they get to that stage in life, and how can I understand where they're coming through or what they're going through? But there's also, I want it to come from the other direction. I want there to be self-awareness. So if you are the senior and you're going to be closer to that, in 10 years, 15 years, and sometimes an incident happens where it happens sooner, understand how hard it is for your kids to approach you and say, hey, let's have this conversation. Let's talk about this. I want to help you. Because if you're just going to dig your heels in and say, I'm going to die in this house, that's going to really, really make it double, triple hard for them to find the help that you need to make sure that you're you're taken care of. I have friends whose mother recently went to heaven. She was 97 years old. She lived on a farm outside of Oklahoma City. She lived on a farm there where she was basically born, raised, married, raised her kids, lived there forever. And it was 35 minutes from any hospital. And she fell probably once a week. She lived alone, and her kids would go visit her regularly, but they begged her and begged her and begged her and begged her to get out of that house because they knew something was going to happen, and she absolutely refused. And every single one of those siblings I talked to, they said, you can try talking to mom, but it ain't going anywhere. It was just never going to happen. And then she eventually did get ill and ended up passing in the hospital. But this is where I'm staying forever. So as you age and you start to have things happen, just be aware of what your kids are experiencing. This isn't a time for vengeance on your children who you had to wait up all night wondering where they were, and now they wonder and worry about how you're doing at your age. It's a time for you guys to have open conversations and to be open-minded to what's next. So empathy is an incredibly important part of this process. So this shows just the basic path that we all face. When you're completely healthy, there's 0 function limits. Then maybe you get a cane and you have limited function, but you can still get around. More limited function where you need to sit down about every 4 or 5 minutes and catch your breath. More limited function where you need some adaptive devices so that you can get around. Significantly limited function where you probably need a caretaker either in your home or you have to go somewhere, and then we're not here anymore. This helps us, even at our age now, wherever we're at, we remember playing basketball when we were 19 and we get a calf injury, and 2 weeks later we were back on the court. And now when we're in our 50s, 60s, 70s and up, we get a calf injury and it lasts 6 months. I had some kind of nasty virus a couple weeks ago. I actually coughed a rib out of place. That never happened when I was 15. So even now, at my age, I recognize that I'm somewhere on this continuum. And when I realize it in myself, I can also empathize when my parents are going through it, and I recognize slower function. And the 2 things I'm going to repeat today are empathy is just going to be my recurring theme. And the other thing is there are 2 extremes in how you deal with this issue. The one extreme is denial. I'm always going to be young and fit and healthy and can take care of myself, and I don't need anybody's help. That's denial. And this shows that eventually that's not going to be the case unless you're superhuman. You're going to have ailments. You're going to get sick. Your body's going to fall apart. That is because we are in a sinful world. And that's just what has happened to the world itself and to the humans who are in it. The day that we're born, we're dying. I know that's drastic and drab, but we are not getting healthier. We are getting less healthy, regardless of how well we take care of ourselves. So self-awareness is really important. Don't fall into the denial stage. Be who you are. Let your hair be gray, and receive help when it's time for you to receive help. The other extreme is paranoia, where mom or dad loses their keys, and now all of a sudden we got to find a place for them to live. Well, when I was 22 years old, I had 150 people in my congregation, and I was older than 22, I was 25. 152 people in my congregation. I knew every single person. I knew their kids. I knew their pets. I knew where they were from. I knew all that stuff. Now I'm 52, and I meet a new caregiver who works in our care community, and the next day I have no idea what their name is. I just met them yesterday. My brain's full. I've hit it. I've hit my capacity. So the only way I'm going to do it is if I forget somebody else or I write it down and keep a journal with me. That doesn't mean that I have dementia. It doesn't mean that I need senior care. It just means I'm getting older and I don't remember things as well. And so if you automatically assume that every ailment your loved one has means you got to start looking for a place for them to live, that's extreme on the other side. So I'm going to give you some tips and some things on what to look for when you start to realize, okay, now we need to start having this conversation. As you show empathy, just remember that adults have a legal right. So not only as your parent, but also as a citizen of this country, they have a legal right to make every decision for themselves so long as they have a legal capacity to do so, even if they need assistance. So the second one it ties into that. Our parents will always be our parents. They're never going to become our children, and we're never going to become their parent. So the role changes, but it doesn't reverse. You don't ever become a parent to your parent, and don't let your kids do that to you either. You're still the parent. So their goal is to provide aid and assistance and support, but not just take over. When the time comes when you're no longer mentally capable to do those things, that's when they may have to take over, only because it's legally and morally correct and it's safer, but not because you're not the parent anymore. So that attitude is super important on how we treat one another, how the child treats the parent. The roles are different, but they're not reversed. So approach the relationship as a partnership. And what I mean by that is anytime if you're working with a parent that needs support, ask for their permission to help. Notice things in areas that you think they need help in, but ask them first, what are the things you think you need help with? What are the things that are causing you some struggles that I can step in and get some help from you? If you get their permission to help on things that they see as important, then you're building trust. And then they're going to be more respectful to listen to you when you notice other things that maybe aren't on their radar. But if you just come in and say, oh, you never keep this kitchen clean. I'm gonna hire somebody and we're gonna get this cleaned up for you. Or your lawn looks terrible. I'm gonna come over and I'm gonna mow for you. It's okay to provide that assistance, but have the conversation first. Ask them, hey, Dad, is it okay if I take this off your plate? I notice it's getting harder, and it's even hard on my back to do the lawn anymore, but we have this kid down the street that'll do it for $15, and he could really use the money. Would you mind if I had him come over here, take care of your lawn for the rest of the summer? There's really simple and loving ways to approach these things, but gaining their permission to help. And because you're, technically imposing on their lives when you come in and decide to just take over. So ask them what areas they want help with to build trust so that you can help them with other things that they need help with. So identifying what are the things that, that you're noticing, and things that maybe, between mom and dad, usually both of them don't age or don't go through these things at the exact same time. So talk to the one that's healthier and sharper and say, hey, have you noticed these things? And these are some very common things that you can help with. Nutrition, you go to their house and you notice there's TV dinners piled up. A lot of the food isn't eaten. You open the fridge and there's like nothing in there. It's like back when they were in college, and there's like a jar of pickles and that's it. So you can pick up on some of these things that, man, you're just not eating well anymore. That one is more common when a spouse passes away and mom or dad is living alone. And it's not just because they're not cognitively capable of it, it's because they're emotionally distraught. They're depressed, and so they don't care. And that sometimes is part of this process. It's not necessarily that they're incapable of caring for themselves. It's that they just kind of have lost their desire. And so that constant interaction with them, visiting them regularly, offering to help, sometimes boosts their mood because they know that they have someone who loves them and can care for them. Travel is just, just getting a ride to an appointment, getting them to church on Sunday, help. Those are simple things that you can help with. Medication management is a pretty important one. The longer the list gets on medications, and they have the little box with Monday through Friday on it, you can check and see, hey, it's Wednesday and Monday and Tuesday's pills are still in there. Doctor said you needed to take that for your heart. Do you want me to come and make sure that you're taking them? No, I'm fine. So even if you don't have, when it comes to medication, even if you don't have their permission to administer them, it's still just wise and responsible to check those pill containers once in a while. Just make sure that they're getting them. Bill payment is another one. It's your parents grew up that everything was tidy, the finances were in complete order, and all of a sudden they get a notice from the city that their water bill hasn't been paid in 2 months. That's not normal for my dad. So if I see that happen, I'm going to, hey, is this something I can take off your plate? Activities of daily living, that in short, ADLs. There's 2 levels of ADLs. This is the most basic for fundamental living. This is what medical professionals use as a standard to gauge what your level of or your ability to live at home by yourself is. And what they'll do is they'll go through each one of these things, ask a lot of questions, and find out what your prowess is in each of those areas, or what your parents' prowess is in each of those areas, and just find out, is it that they're incapable, or is it potentially that they just need adaptive devices? For instance, having a higher seat on the restroom because their back is bad and they can't get down and up. So self-feeding, I have this, I was going to bring it and I forgot. I have this really, really heavy, thick fork that I got at this craft store up in Minocqua, Wisconsin, and it is so thin on one side and strong that I can cut a steak with this thing with one hand. I love it. What I didn't realize is it's actually made for seniors as an adaptive device. So I'm kind of pre-aging a little bit, but I love this fork, and I got 4 of them because that's the only one I use because I love how convenient it is. But there are things out there. Like you saw the video before of the man who was having a hard time getting the spoon up there. There are devices that you can use for utensils, things that can be adaptive that will help them with some of these common things. So you don't automatically assume that since I'm seeing a lack in one of these areas, it must mean they need to come live with us. It may just mean, let's assess it. There may be tools that we can give them to help them with this so that we don't jump the gun too soon. But when you have 2 of these issues or 3, they use that as a number. There's a 1 through 5 number on these ADLs where the medical professional might say, there's 3 out of 5 that your parent is struggling with. You've already tried adaptive devices. You may need to consider another alternative, either a health professional coming in or finding a place where they can get support. These are the ones that they use as kind of an early assessment. It's more of a monitoring process because there's a lot more like cognitive and organizational things where you can start to see the difference between just basic, I forgot, memory isn't the same as it used to be, and incapable of carrying these things out. So housekeeping and laundry, money management, preparing the meals. I have a friend who lives out in Arizona. His dad is 85, but still able to live at home. And this guy is one of the best cooks I've ever known. And he will go to his dad's house. He will cook all day on Sunday. He will put these meals with labels on them in his dad's fridge. And all his dad has to do is take Monday out, put it in the microwave, and he's got a gourmet meal just like that. So even when they were young and healthy, they might have been terrible in the kitchen. So you can't expect that when they get older, they're just all of a sudden going to know how to cook. My wife is an amazing cook. I can get by, but she's an amazing cook. If something ever happens to her, I'm going to need somebody to come to my house and cook a bunch of stuff, put stickers on it, and put it in the fridge. So that's a common thing. There's a lot of ways that you can help your parents through these stages. But again, these ADLs are what health professionals like occupational therapists and physicians will use to gauge their ability to live at home by themselves. This is going to be available for you to take. These are good things to have, because if the day comes when you actually are going to go to a place that has an assisted living facility and you want to know what to expect, that's what to expect. That's what they're going to do. So my office at our nursing home is right across the hall from the physical and occupational therapy room. And all day long, I hear Mackenzie talking to the seniors and saying, it's almost like math class when they were in 5th grade. All right, now you have $20 in your purse. You need to go pick these 4 items up and you give them cash. How much money should you expect to get back? So they're just making sure that they have the ability in their community to go downtown, use cash, get their money back, and that nobody's going to steal from them. They know what they're going to get. So they go through some of these processes just to help them understand. They'll have a big clock and they'll set the clock and they'll tell me what time it is. And it seems overly simplistic, but it's a way for them to gauge what the mental capacity is and your ability to live alone. I call this the talk. When you've done those assessments, you've made observations, and whether it's spouse to spouse or child to parent, at some point you have to sit down and say, you might not be able to live in your house forever. It's not an easy conversation to have. It's really important to know, depending on how many children are involved. So I come from a family of 6, and I know who the right people are to talk to my parents. One of them is my sister, because she's the nicest human being I've ever met. And a second place is Moni's father, Dell, who's in heaven now. But just the nicest human, just so kind and loving, and would just be able to solicit responses and get understanding from my parents. The second would be my youngest brother, who is just he's just smooth, just slick, just knows how to talk and make people feel good. And then I also have a brother who's a physician. So whenever anybody has any ailment, well, Kevin says, because he's the doctor, he knows everything. But at least we've got that in the family. And so then if the doctor says, Dad, you need to be thinking about this, then at least they listen. So I'm blessed to have other people, not me, who have the ability to have these conversations with my family, because as well as I get along with my dad, he's never been particularly interested in my opinion. So it would be hard for me to say, Dad, I think you need, I'm fine. So that's just a good thing to have the talk. And it's also, here's a conversation that's never happened ever. Hey, Dad, I noticed you're not real good behind the wheel anymore. I was thinking maybe you give me the keys and you don't drive anymore. Oh, thanks, son. The keys are in the drawer. Great idea. Never has that been said by anyone ever. That is one of the most, it's like a rite of passage, and it's like stealing and taking back a monumental right of an adult to say you're not able to drive anymore. That's a super hard conversation to have, and it takes a lot of care and a lot of empathy. And the best way to understand where they're coming from is if your wife told you at your age now that you can't drive anymore. How would you react? It's not even a discussion. It's not going to happen. So you have to take that with care and love and patience. And I've known people who've had to hide the keys. It's super hard to have these conversations. This came up in the sermon today, and I was glad that Dan said it. This is really, 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 really hard. It's hard. So I want to remind you of the two main themes of this presentation. Number one is empathy, is that you're listening and you care and you know how they feel, so you approach it as such. And the other one is self-awareness. If you're the one who has a slower reaction time behind the wheel than you used to, and you can't quite see at night the way you used to, be aware of that so that when somebody brings it to your attention, you're not immediately defensive. We age, it's part of life, it's okay. Be willing to listen when your loved ones bring it to your attention. You can have the conversation, you can argue your case, but don't immediately clam up and get upset because it's hard for them to have the conversation in the first place. Having a conversation with the caregiving parent. In other words, so dad is the one whose memory is beyond just forgetfulness. There's just a lot of things. The stories are repeated every single day. They never remember to take their medication. They went for a walk and weren't sure how to get home. Like now we're talking about some more serious cognitive issues. You recognize it, so you go to mom and say, hey, have you noticed that when you go for a walk, dad seems a little confused about where we are? And a lot of times, oh yeah, I've noticed that. So you partner with mom to have the conversation with dad, just so that, you're not ganging up on them, but you've got support. Have you seen this? Is this something that you're aware of? It's good for you to build that relationship. The hard part is sometimes the spouse is in denial too, because they don't want the relationship they've had for 50 years with their spouse to change. They don't want to have to go to another place to live, or only one of them to have to go to a place to live and the other one stays home. So there's a lot of fear there in changing what they've had in their marriage for that many years. So the mom might be in denial too. That makes it a lot harder when the primary caregiver in the home isn't on the same page as you. So I wish I had awesome advice for how to deal with that. All I can say is there are four main components: patience, love, and patience. It just takes a long time to get through to them, and you just gotta lovingly go through the pain. And it's always hard. Sometimes it goes really smoothly, but it's usually hard, and you just need to know that that's the case. Also remember that you've got support. You heard about your neighbors today, siblings, family members, neighbors, friends, church family. There are a lot of churches, and faith is very proactive in even having this conversation in your church. But there are a lot of churches that have a group of people who volunteer just to go and take people to appointments and help families who have someone who's struggling with age, needs somebody to come and clean the house once in a while, prepare meals. Church families, they do that. There's a lot of, and just because, so my family, I have 3 siblings who live in Appleton, Wisconsin, and that's where my parents live now. There's most of the grandkids are there, and they're the ones who are interacting with my parents regularly. But just because they're the closest doesn't mean it's all their responsibility. So are there things that I can do 6 hours away? Well, finances, everything's online now. I could do all their bills from my house, from my computer. There's a lot of things that I can do. We talked about earlier in the sermon, we talked about financial support. So my parents had 6 kids, put us all through parochial grade school and high school, and my dad was a pastor for his whole career. And so there's not a lot of money left when that's all done. So now we as kids take, here's what they can afford, here's what they need, and we all split it. We just, take turns taking care of certain bills. We take the total cost of where they're living and split the difference between the rest of us. There are ways for us to participate in that and to take care of that. Just because the sibling is the closest doesn't mean they're the only ones who have the responsibility. So find ways for everybody to partner together and to work with that. community programs. One of the slides that I have on here is coming up, and it talks about a different, like a website, a state website that gives you a phone number that you can call to find out what are services like this. Meals on Wheels, delivery services, pharmacy delivery, senior center, adult day services, which means if they're living in your home and you just need a day, a place for them to have other people to play cards with and hang out with and take care of them so you can get stuff done for your personal lives, all those kinds of things. I'll have a resource for you to find out what's available in your county. And that's right here, Senior Linkage Line, 800-333-2433. That's what they do. It's part of the Aging Disability Resource Centers, ADRC. That's a federal program that makes sure that each state has all of these resources available for people to take a look at and just call and say, hey, these are the things that my family member needs. What's available in my area to help with that? A lot of it is available at no cost, some of it at a very low cost. Meals on Wheels are fully prepared, cooked meals, sometimes as little as $3 or $4 a meal. So there are ways to get help, because you can't do it all. And when God says, I want you to care for your family, He doesn't expect you to do it all by yourself. So find out what your resources are available through the government as well. Responding to pushback. We don't want to be a burden. So we talked about that in the sermon today. There's this mentality that either we feel they're a burden on us, or they feel that they're a burden on their own. They don't want anyone to do for them. How would you respond to that? We don't want to be a burden. Yeah.
We want to do this.
And you can use the Bible passage we learned before. I'm repaying you for all the things you've done for me. This is a way for me to honor you. Another important point to bring up is that you are modeling what it means to care for your parents to your children. You're showing your children how you respect your parents, so that they know what it looks like when you get to be that age. It's like the old joke, be nice to your kids because they get to pick your nursing home. When you model love and empathy with your parents, you're teaching your kids how you want to be treated when you get to that point. And so you can tell your parent, Dad, this is a way for me to model for my kids, your grandkids, what it means to reciprocate the love that you've given us. And I want you to let me do that. And this is important for me to do. I'm a perfectly good driver. How do you respond to that one when you ask them if you can have the keys?
Well, I hate to be the only one saying it.
That's okay. Yeah.
And then what happened was a doctor appointment where the doctor said maybe you shouldn't be driving anymore.
Yeah, and that's a really, really, really good point. Don't be afraid to use your medical professionals as leverage. When they make the assessment, you're being responsible and carrying it out. It's not your decision. And that kind of goes with the next one. Are you a doctor? Well, avoid that question by getting your doctors involved early. And so there is such a thing as HIPAA, where you do not have the right to find out what your doctor talked about with your loved one. However, you have the right to go to the doctor and say, I want to share my observations with you so that you have more context when you evaluate my dad and their appointment next week. You have the right to do that, and they will listen. And then when they have that context and they have those conversations, they might pick up on some things that you mentioned. So you have the right to share that information with a physician. And then to get information from the physician, you would need your parents' permission permission for that. We'll talk about different kinds of permission before we're finished here. But the thing that somebody brought to my attention with the driver issue is if you stage it in such a way where you explain, your response time is not the same as it was as a driver. And in our neighborhood, sometimes little kids run out, and if you're not able to slow down quickly enough and a child is harmed, I don't think you'd be able to handle that. I don't think you want that. So that's one of the reasons why, just for safety and for your conscience, I want to make sure that we start looking at taking the keys away. If you guys got to sneak out, I'm not going to be offended by that. Yeah, no problem. So nice to see you guys. Thanks for sticking around today. Okay. Medical directives resources. So there's 2 documents that you can get from the government that are super helpful. One of them is a medical directive resource that basically says if something happens to my mom or dad or my spouse, I have the right to make decisions when they are incapable of making those decisions. And the handout that this will be printed for you so that you can get those links so you know where to go. But there's also what's called the power of attorney, and they're not one and the same. If you have a power of attorney that says, I have the right to find out information about my loved one's finances, about some of their, legal things, and I have the right to make decisions when they're no longer to make decisions, that does not include the medical part. So you need both. You need a power of attorney, which is the legal side. You need a medical directive, which is the health side. You need both of those things. They're not one and the same. This one, I'm just giving you a preview of next week. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Omni Kicker, who's going to be here next week, is a very good friend of mine. She's so gentle and kind and knowledgeable, and she does this stuff every single day. So she's going to talk to you about some very simple things that you can do to prepare for the financial future of what you want to happen to your stuff. And if you don't do anything, the state just takes it and they decide what happens to it, and that's no fun. So Omni's a great resource to help you with that, and she has a cool name. Have you ever known an Omni before? It's the coolest name ever. One of the things that I don't know if she's going to mention or not, but I wanted to mention, is to generate a list of usernames and passwords of your loved ones, because if something happens to them, you will absolutely have no way to get in there and shut it off. And I'm going to tell you a terrible story to help you understand this. My friend in Belle Plaine, his son passed away at age 19. It was a horrible accident. And every single year on his birthday, he gets a LinkedIn notice, don't forget your son's birthday, from his son's account. And he can't go in and shut it off because he doesn't have the right. So get a list of all online social media, banks, all that kind of stuff ahead of time. Do that for your kids, even if you're 20 years old. Do that right now and have that available, because once you pass away, nobody can get into those accounts ever again. And it can be really, really frustrating and annoying. So I have yapped for a very long time. But I'm going to give you time to ask any questions that you have, any feedback, any things that you think I could help with.
Meals on Wheels is a good resource.
Yes. Yeah, Meals on Wheels, it's a fully cooked, fully prepared meal brought right to your door at mealtime. It's a great plan, and it's usually really, really inexpensive.
I don't have a question per se, but because both my parents have passed away, but I think this is great for my age group, because now I can start planning for my children and let them know in advance, just like the passwords, but also I think I'm ready to give up my keys. I think we're ready to sell our house. I mean, we need to really be wise about that part of our lives where we know that it is time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent. And because do you know when most people make these decisions? When there's an accident, when somebody falls and breaks a hip, when somebody has a stroke, when it's an emergency. And if you haven't done any of this work ahead of time, it ends up being a tornado of a lot of emotional and difficult stuff all at once. So if you're thinking about it ahead of time, it makes it a lot easier. It makes a difficult thing less difficult.
So I kind of just went through this yesterday with my sister. She's 82. She really can't be living at home alone, but her kids are good enough about kind of flip-flopping. She's living
Yeah.
with her daughter most of the time, but then they bring her home so she can kind of see if she can do it alone. She said to me yesterday, she says, I really don't want to be a burden to my kids. They keep telling me that they want to do this, but I don't want to be a burden. And I just simply told her, and I don't know if it was the right thing to say, I told her that by refusing to let them do this, I think it's offensive to them. They take offense to that because this is their time. They want to help you. You have to let them help you. And I don't know if that was the right thing to say or not, but she says, I never did think about it that way before.
No, I think you know your sister, and I think that was probably the right way to phrase it with her. You know, you could take it a couple of different ways, but I think for her to see it's hurting them, that you don't want them, you know, your pride, so to speak, and not wanting to be a burden isn't allowing them to share their love with you. So I think that was kind of just a quick little jab that helped her to see the truth. And it worked. So that's good. Yeah.
And along with that, actually not taking the help that they're offering is a burden on the kids.
Yeah.
They have so much responsibility that they can't deal with it when you're not letting them do something to help out and make it a lot easier.
Yeah, because then you have to come back and make up for what they wouldn't let you do in the first place. It's like, I won't let you get gas for my car, but then you got to go pick me up when I run out of gas 20 miles out of town. Well, if you would have let me get gas in the first place. So yeah, you're right. It compounds and makes it more difficult later. All right.
I just have something stupid to say.
Oh, right.
I
like those things.
always joke with my kids, well, I changed your diaper. Well, one day you're going to have to change mine. And I'm okay with that, just mentally. But I think it's humility, right? As we age, the humility to say, I cannot continue to do what I've always done, and ask God for the help to do that. And I think everything you've discussed, my encouragement, bathe this in prayer, that as you have these hard conversations, pray a lot, and God, give me wisdom, give me the empathy, give me the patience to love my elderly loved ones. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for your attention, and thanks for inviting me to come. I appreciate it. Thanks. Yeah, you're welcome. And I can wait till you turn the video off before I make a shameless plug. But I really am moved to see the people that I work with and what they do and how they treat people. When I get to the point where I need a place to stay, I would stay at the place where I work. I love it there. I love the people. It's just a genuine, caring environment. And we've been really blessed in the last 3 months. I think I have gotten 15 cards from family members that just thank the nurses for how they treated their parent. And I'm proud of them. I think they work really hard. Your daughter is one of them. It's a special place to be. It's not always the answer, but sometimes it is. But if I already have my room picked out at our assisted living, because there's this 2-bedroom den with a patio that wraps around and overlooks the huge green in the back. So that's where I'm going to live someday, but we'll see. But anyway, I really love it. If you ever do have to look, I truly feel, we have just a beautiful Christian environment, and I love it. So tell your friends who are actually looking for that. I'm happy there. How far are you? 30 minutes. Almost exactly 30 minutes. Yep.